Hey, so before we get started, if you could take a second to like, subscribe, share, or even comment on this, that would be really helpful. But anyway, today I'm working on a 1994 Ford Ranger with a 2.3. I have to change the crank sensor. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this upper radiator hose, which I've already removed, and the lower radiator hose. Next, there's going to be 2 bolts that hold the fan shroud on. You're going to have to lift up and push it back over the fan. Then there's 2 bolts that hold on the radiator. Once you remove those, you can pull the radiator straight up like this. Set it to the side. And then we can pull this fan shroud forward and up. Go ahead and place that to the side. Then you're going to come back and take the fan off. And as you can see, there are 4 bolts. I believe they were 10 mils. So take that off and you can set it to the side. Make sure it's somewhere safe so you don't accidentally drop it and break it. Next, we're going to have to loosen the tensioner for the Serpentine belt. It's pretty easy. Just take a 3/8 wrench of some sort, like so. Place it in the little notch that's on the tensioner, and then you pull it towards the alternator. And it will move the tensioner. So while you have it to the left, just pull the belt off the alternator and you're good to go. Next, we're going to take the 4 bolts off of the bottom harmonic balancer, I believe. It's the crank pulley. So it's just 4 bolts, pull those off, and then you can pull the whole thing off like that. So there are 3 bolts down here. There was a 10, I had taken that off, but you didn't actually need to. It's this 8mm. And then I found that there's actually a second 8mm. Next, you're going to need a 5.5mm wrench to take off the 2 bolts that actually hold the crank sensor on. Next, you're going to need a bolt style puller like this one I got from Harbor Freight. I used the 2 bolts up here and the puller. There's a flat pusher that you slip into it like this, and then a couple washers to go on the bolts. So I've already removed the 22mm bolt from the crank here, but I threaded it back in maybe a 1/2 inch. I'm going to use that bolt to help me pull the crank pulley off. So the center of the puller is actually going to rest on the head of the bolt. And I had to use an adjustable wrench right here because the motor was trying to turn over while loosening this crank pulley. So as you can see, I just put a little bit of resistance on it so it doesn't spin, and I back off the pulley. You can see it slowly moving backwards a little bit. And so it's completely loose now. So we're just going to finish taking off the puller. Just loosening these 2 bolts. After that, we're going to take our 22mm and just take out the crank bolt. So I actually forgot to get video of this in action. This is the tensioner tool I made for about $9. It's a 1 1/8 inch socket I got from Northern Tool. There's a channel right there, and there's a groove on the back. So the way this works is you put it on the tensioner and then you twist with a breaker bar or something. So this groove right here is for the top spring to slip through when you rotate it, and this bottom one is the groove that actually releases the tension from the tensioner when you twist. So I've already used the tensioner and removed the timing belt. I also had to remove the AC compressor for this. I just tucked the AC compressor down below this. So the wire for the crank sensor runs behind the tensioner, and the piece of plastic that goes behind all the gears. I accidentally broke the plastic, but anyway, if you depin the sensor like this, you can tie it to a clothes hanger and kind of pull it up, because the hole is right down there, the bottom hole. It's kind of hard to see. So I got the sensor pulled through. You can see that I'm starting the wire through. The way I removed the old sensor too is I cut the sensor off and just pulled the cable out from the back, because there was no way to get this little piece off here without completely taking off the power steering and the bracket that holds on the power steering pump and the AC compressor. So now once I pulled it back through, I just repinned the 4-pin connector, and this little piece right here on the new sensor had a fin. I had to cut that off. The only thing this does really is acts like a support cable. This isn't grounded. It's not anything to do with the actual reading of the sensor. But once you plug in the connectors and everything, you have to put the AC compressor back on, the tensioner back on, as well as the pulley, the idler pulley that goes in the serpentine belt. So here's that tool again, and this is how you slip it on. Once it's on, you just take the tension back off the tensioner pulley, because we need to lock it into place with that one bolt while we put the timing belt back on. So I neglected to get video of this beforehand, but before I pulled the timing belt, I actually marked everything with a white paint marker, and that basically just lets me line the belt back up without having to set the motor in top dead center or any of that. So you can see there's marks on every pulley and the belt with where the teeth fit in the grooves. And then just go ahead and release the tension, and I used a pry bar to push on the tensioner to put more tension on the belt, and be sure to tighten down that bolt that holds the tensioner in place. Before you put on the sensor, do you see that big washer? Make sure you put that big washer back on, because once you put the sensor on, you're not going to be able to get the timing belt retainer back on, which is the big washer. So definitely make sure you put that in, because I forgot to. Okay, so now I don't know what I did with the retainer, disappeared, but I ended up damaging the bolts on this bracket when I removed it, so I had to get some replacements, and I figured I'd tell you that it's an M6-1.0 by 20 millimeters. There's only a slight difference, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw these in. They're 10 millimeters instead of the 8s that were on it. This little red tool is basically an alignment tool for the sensor, you put it on the crank right here like this, and that lets you get a proper alignment. After that, you can just spin the crank with the adjustable wrench again and pull the tool out, the little alignment pin. So there you can see that I have removed it. I'm going to go ahead and put back on this pulley. I believe it was a 17 or an 18 millimeter. I do not recall. But just going to go ahead and tighten that up. And now we're back to putting on the crank pulley for the Serpentine belt. It is for 10 millimeters, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and put some anti-seize on it though, because I'm nice to the next guy. Alright, it's all bolted up, and I just did the reverse process to get the Serpentine belt on. Next, I'm going to put the fan on, and then we're going to put the shroud back on. It has to go back in before the radiator, so I'm just setting it on the fan. And now we're going to set in the radiator, making sure to get the pins down in their little grommets. There's one on the right and one on the left. So we're just going to slip it straight down. Get our little bolts started. Going to get everything tightened up real quick. And now we're going to put our shroud on. So there's actually two little hooks at the bottom of the radiator that hook into the shroud to hold the bottom in place, and then the two bolts hold the top in place. Next, we're putting on our radiator hoses, top, bottom, and the coolant reservoir. Now this part is kind of important. We're going to burp the coolant system. Anytime you remove coolant, you should do this. It will remove air pockets from the coolant system, which can cause vehicles to run weird. So basically, I filled up the radiator pretty much with 100% concentrated coolant and distilled water, 50 to 50 mix. It gets you, this will get you a total of 3 gallons of coolant, which is a lot cheaper than if you bought the pre-mixed stuff. So I'm just going to fill it up with water and coolant, and then start the motor so that everything can start heating up. And what you're looking for is, once the vehicle heats up enough, it's going to open the thermostat, and the thermostat is going to help you release more air bubbles. You can see those bubbles there, so it's pretty much up to temp, but I am revving the motor a little bit to help circulate the bubbles, as well as massaging some of the hoses to get any air bubbles that might be trapped out. And you basically just keep doing this until you see no more air bubbles. Anyway, once again, if you like this video, could you please like, comment, share, subscribe? Any of those 4 things will really help me out. And anyway, I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.